Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us. My name is Jude Blanchette, and I'm the Freeman Chair in China Studies here at CSIS. Really glad you could all join us this morning, and I'm really excited to be discussing this new CSIS report, which just came out yesterday, entitled Party on the Bridge, Political Commissars in the Chinese Navy. This really fantastic report explores the broader topic of Communist Party control over the People's Liberation Army, but it does so by looking narrowly at this fascinating and understudied mechanism of control and oversight that the Communist Party has borrowed from other Leninist regimes, and that is this political commissar role. Specifically, this report is looking at the role of political commissar in the PLA Navy, but I think the implications of this research are very important for looking at the military preparedness of the PLA more broadly. And as we're now making a much more concerted effort here in the United States to understand at a much more granular and nuanced level the Communist Party in general, this work really feeds into that much broader topic of coming up on 100 years in its total history, and more than 70 of those years in power. How has the Communist Party managed to defy all the predictions of collapse? How has the Communist Party managed to maintain an ironclad grip over the PLA? And so this work, I think, gives us some new, fresh perspective on this. And if you're like me, previously, the only thing you really knew about the political commissar comes from a short scene in the masterful Hunt for Red October. But as my colleagues are about to explain, while there are some similarities and overlapping legacies of the Chinese and Soviet systems, there's important divergences. So we need to probably excise that Hunt for Red October scene from our mind as we try and understand the commissar system in China. So in the interest of time, I'm going to get right into it. I'm really pleased that both of the authors of the report are here, one of them dialing in from Singapore and the other from an undisclosed location on the outskirts of Washington, D.C. First, we've got Commander Jeff Benson, who I was privileged to work alongside of over this past year, where he was a military fellow at CSIS, and he's been spending that time primarily working on the underlying research that went into this report. Jeff is previously served as XO and commanding officer of the destroyer USS Stefan, and he was forward deployed in Japan from 2015 to 2019. Jeff has also served aboard 4 different destroyers and as a staff officer aboard an aircraft carrier operating primarily in the Indo-Pacific. He has taught at the US Navy's Surface Warfare Officer School, served as a director fellow of the Chief of Naval Operations Strategic Studies Group, and was an assistant professor at Texas A&M University's Naval Reserve Officer Training Corps. Also really pleased to have joining us today is Ziyang, who you will hear referred to as Mike throughout today's presentation, most likely, but really glad to have Ziyang joining us. He's a senior analyst with the China program at the Rajaratnam School of International Studies, which is at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. He holds a Master's of Arts in Asian Studies from Georgetown University and a Bachelor of Arts in Global Affairs and History from George Mason University. Previously, he worked at Georgetown University's Center for Security Studies and the U.S. Institute of Peace. Just a quick logistical note, we're going to go for about another 26, 27 minutes. And after we have some opening brief from Ziyang and Jeff, we'll go to a Q&A. If you haven't already sent a Q&A via by the button on the events page, you can do so pretty easily here via Zoom. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see a Q&A. So if you just pull your mouse to the bottom where you see participants chat, screen share, et cetera, you should see Q&A. Type your question there, and then I'll be monitoring those, and I'll ask those during the open session. If that fails for whatever reason, as a second option, you can just type it into chat, and I'll make sure I monitor that as well. So again, thanks for joining us. And with that, I am going to share my screen and turn this over to Jeff.
Thank you, Jude. For the next 10 to 12 minutes, my colleague Mike and I will provide a brief overview of why we did this research, duties of the political commissar, and how the commissar can influence naval operations. Before I begin, the views expressed in this online event are mine and do not reflect the official policy position of the U.S. Navy, U.S. Department of Defense, or the U.S. government. Next. Today, the Chinese Navy operates near U.S. warships in the Western Pacific, sometimes creating tense situations in what can only be described as a game of cat and mouse. These ship maneuvers, while tactical in nature, can have strategic implications. A future maritime incident between China's People Liberation Army Navy, commonly referred to as the PLAN, and U.S. Navy is possible, but it can and should be avoided. Most strategists, tacticians, analysts, and policymakers focus heavily on the advances of Chinese naval hardware capabilities. For example, weapons, submarines, ships, electronic surveillance and attack platforms. While grasping changes in platform capabilities is vital, understanding the software component, how Chinese Navy makes decisions using those capabilities, is equally as important, especially to avoid miscalculation on the high seas. Next. From Chinese naval headquarters to individual naval vessels, the political commissar works side by side with the military commander. This photo is from the 70th anniversary of the PLAN in 2019. It represents the close working relationship of these two naval officers. On the left is Admiral Shen, commander of the PLAN, and on the right is the political commissar, Admiral Chen. Both officers strive in achieving military and political objectives set forth by the Chinese Communist Party. While both officers have distinct responsibilities, those duties are inevitably linked to each other and both share the same authority, whether leading at the highest levels of the Chinese Communist Party or aboard Chinese naval vessels. Commissars are conducting political work, which serves as the identity of a party navy. I will now turn it over to my colleague Mike to discuss the specific duties of the political commissar. Next.
Well, thank you, Jeff. So nowadays, we often talk about what Mao refers to as the CCP's magic weapons to success. United Front is a very huge topic. Armed struggle regarding military affairs, also a big topic, but less often talked about is party building. But from the CCP's point of view, it's very important. By strengthening these party organs, it can help the party adapt and succeed in the long term. And party building is not just in the civilian world, it's also in the military world. The PLA is a military with a strong ideological commitment, reinforced by party control mechanisms. And the party control of the PLA can be traced all the way back to 1927 to its predecessors. And in 1949, when the PLA Navy was established, it copied a lot of the PLA Army's political control institutions. Next, please. So the basics of party control constitute of three institutions. One is the party committee, one is the dual command, and the political commissar. The party committee is the supreme decision-making organ in the unit. Generally, it's chaired by the political officer, political commissar, and operates under the principle of division of responsibility under the unified collective leadership of the party committee. What does that mean? Let me give you an example. Let's say a Chinese vessel encountered pirate boats during its escort mission in the Gulf of Aden. So the party committee will quickly make a decision on whether to confront or not. And once they decide to confront, the military side of things will be taken care of by the military commander or the captain. And the political side of things, such as psychological warfare, rallying the troops, will be taken care of by the political commissar. The dual command is a simple concept that the captain and the political commissar, in the case of the PLAN, they are the co-commanders of the unit, equal in rank and grade. And the political commissar, they can intervene in the captain's decisions if the situation requires. But usually they just focus on their own area of expertise, political work, especially, you can divide it into party building, personnel management, propaganda indoctrination, counterintelligence, security, wartime political work, and shaping the lifestyle in the unit. Next, please. So party control of the PLAN, it's political officers and political workers. They're present in all PLAN units. You may find a specific chart on page 17 of the report. Political commissars, they're present on all PLAN vessels normally encountered by foreign navies on the high seas. And the party committees, they're organized on every vessels, and they're the supreme decision-making organ on these vessels. The political officer normally serve as the secretary of these party committees. So what are the basic tasks of the party committee? Well, just to summarize, leading troops, making decisions on major issues, and also administrative tasks and ensuring the party's decisions are respected and carried out. There's a more specific details on the page 12 of the report on the basic task of the party committee. So in the Xi era, there's a growing emphasis on the party control, in the civilian and the military world. In fact, yesterday, the Politburo passed a document calling for further strengthening of the party in the PLA, especially highlighting the role of party secretaries and party leadership. Party leadership, I would say, is probably referring to these party committees. Under these circumstances, the party committee and the political commissar that chairs the party committee, their power relations has definitely shifted, in their favor over the captain. Also there's a greater demand to return to the revolutionary tradition of what they call the fighting commissar. Political commissars in the PLAN, they're learning how to command in order to serve as capable co-commanders, and they must pass different examinations. Let's say you're in the sub forces, you must study submarine warfare. And in order to be promoted, you must pass exams on submarine warfare and the specifics. Next, please. So just a case in point, since we're talking about the PLAN sub-branch, as of 2019, the PLAN, its sub-branches are growing in its capacity, and it will definitely take on a lead role in future naval conflict over, say, the more showy pieces, such as China's nascent aircraft carrier group. So publicly available sources show that political commissars and their deputies are the main characters in terms of disciplining crew members, building a team spirit in the subs, and elevating morale and sort of stabilizing the unit during emergency situations. Party committees, they're also making important decisions on these submarines. For example, we have seen cases where when confronted with a hardware malfunction, the party committees, the party committee decided whether to surface or remain submerged while encountering this trouble. Other details, however, such as the political commissar's relations with the captain and the political commissar's counterintelligence duties are not reported in open sources due to security implications, of course. And next, please. And just to illustrate, how close relations are between the political commissar and the captain in PLAN subforces, here's a cutout view of a Han-class nuclear submarine of the PLAN. As you can see where the red pin is pointed, that chamber right there is the sleeping quarters for the political commissar and the captain. So not only do they command together at the command center, the long room next to the small chamber, they also rest in the same area. So the influence going both ways is not just in an official capacity, and definitely on an unofficial capacity, on a personal level, the influence is strong. Thank you. Next, please.
All right, thanks, Mike. The role of the political commissar is not new. For more than 70 years, even with enormous recent growth of the maritime power, the Chinese Navy has maintained a dual command relationship between the military commander and the political commissar. Political commissars are given authority parallel to the military commander aboard naval vessels that allows them to influence naval operations more than previously thought. There are three distinct command and control characteristics aboard Chinese vessels. First, the military commander and political commissar are to integrate as one to promote a collective leadership model. Second, the seniority of a political commissar and commander of a naval vessel are typically the same. It's a system of shared authority with separate responsibilities interconnected. Third, commissars manage the Chinese Navy's personnel system. For example, the commissar provides input about the commanding officer's performance to the next higher level. While the Chinese Navy shares similar ways of managing functions such as navigation and engineering aboard naval vessels, the organizational structure and approach to making decisions differs significantly from the US Navy. The Chinese dual command system relies on the commanding officer and the political commissar making decisions collectively, whereas the US Navy relies on one individual, the commanding officer. Next slide. In addition to this dual command system, the Chinese Navy relies heavily on a party standing committee, which is the central nervous system for planning and developing naval operations. This collective leadership model is used in problem solving and emphasizes more control. The graphic depicts notionally the two different command and control systems. On the left, the US Navy embraces a command triad leadership model. This includes a commanding officer, an executive officer, and the top senior enlisted officer. On the right, the party standing committee is comprised of 5 to 6 commissioned officers, commanding officer, 2 executive officers, 1 for operations and the other executive officer for administrative and logistics, a political commissar, and either 1 or 2 deputy political commissars. There are 4 areas that could be problematic with the party standing committee and a dual command system. First, such a formal and hierarchical process, administrative and operational time delays could and probably occur. Second, a commanding officer in the Chinese Navy can make military-related decisions, but the political commissar has a vote in the process and can cause change if desired. Third, a dual command system limits flexibility and crew initiative. Fourth, miscommunication between the commanding officer and political commissar will occur. While potential challenges exist with these 2 systems, there are positive attributes to consider as well. First, the political commissar is primarily dedicated to personnel management. This is an enormous investment in personnel can lead to an enhanced military readiness. And second, the challenges and trials of command are shared collectively by 2 officers. The ability to discuss and work through complex issues can reduce the stress placed on an individual in a single command system. Finally, a collective decision-making process can help reduce unnecessary errors. Next slide. Mao once said, quote, "Military action is a method used to attain a political goal. While military affairs and political affairs are not identical, it is impossible to isolate one from the other," end quote. For most modern militaries, political commissars are an unfamiliar institution. Aboard Chinese Navy vessels, political commissars have a significant role. They are co-equals with the commanding officer and jointly share command. As China continues to build up a Navy comparable in scale and capability to its American counterpart, understanding how the Chinese Communist Party manages and directs its Navy is useful in preventing miscalculations and avoiding potential armed conflicts. And that concludes our presentation.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Thanks to everyone for your patience, as apparently I was sharing the presenter view for half the presentation. That just shows the radical level of transparency we have at CSIS. But we've got some great questions already coming into the queue. So I wondered if I could just quickly take moderator's prerogative here and ask Jeff and Xiang just a quick question, which is, we've had antecedents, obviously, of the commissar system and obviously the most apposite one here would be the Soviet Union. Jeff, something you discovered much later in your research was that the Soviet Union also had dual command and moved away from it. I know you haven't spent a ton of time studying this, but this seems pretty important that one of the other Leninist Marxist systems to use this dual command and party commissars moved away from it. Do you have any preliminary thoughts about why that may have been the case? And I guess looking into your crystal ball, has the Chinese leadership decided that the dual command is a irrevocable virtue that it's going to stick with, or do you think there might be a shift in how they think about the liabilities or strengths of the dual command moving forward?
Thanks, Jude. So in the research of the Soviet Union, just make it clear that they're completely different. There may be some functional similarities of how to do things, but the commissar in the Soviet system was subordinate to the commanding officer. and it was more of kind of a reporting mechanism for the party. He didn't share dual command. There was one single commander with the Soviet system, so it was a single command kind of party type system. The Chinese have made the decision that they are going with the dual command process. Now, over history, there has been some situations where there have been discussions. Literature has shown that they've talked about going back to a single command or something like that. But I think what they did is and I think Mike can allude to this too, is that they don't want to follow the same mistakes that the Soviets made, and so they're pretty lock in step with this dual command system, at least of today. Mike, I don't know if you want to add any more to that.
Sure. Actually, in the 50s, when China was leaning to one side, they were learning everything from the Soviet Union, including the consideration whether to switch from a party committee system, from a dual command system to a single command system. There was quite an intense discussion, but eventually Mao was against this institution. And most of of course, the political commissar establishment and some of the high command. So eventually it was not adopted. And another thing is that, we have to look at, when we try to understand how the CCP look at things, we have to, understand its history. The PLAN was actually founded with vessels that defected from the ROC Navy towards the end of the Chinese Civil War. And in fact, if you look at the number of defections from the ROC Navy from 48 to 49, about 1/3 of their naval vessels defected to the communist side. So, when we're looking at party control, one thing they want to ensure is absolute loyalty to the party. So, I do not think they will sort of morph into a single commander system. They will definitely keep that, linkage with the party alive as long as possible.
Great, thanks. I'm going to combine two questions here. I think these are the kind of the big questions when folks are looking at this from the outside, and this is how this may or may not heighten the risk of miscommunication or conflict. So we've got two questions. One of them is the risk of an incident such as a ship collision or worse, an inadvertent use of force, higher based on this sort of structure of leadership command? And then another one is what happens in a battlefield situation where both military commander and political commissar cannot agree on a given course of action?
Okay, hopefully I can answer both. Let me just make a general comment about naval operations. Anytime, any nation will spend an enormous amount of time in planning and developing operations. The Party Standing Committee is that function in that developing and planning part of the operations. So for example, US FONOPS, if we talk about the Decatur incident, all the preparations for them potentially going alongside, well, I don't have any evidence of that, notionally, the Party Standing Committee probably discussed and planned those operations, but then it was the job of the military commander to execute. So the commissar is involved in all the planning and the process. It is up to the military commander to execute the military aspect of the operation, which I think is important. Another one is that the Chinese follow our warships throughout the Pacific. The decision of how close they get or the approach, I would imagine the commissar is involved in those discussions as well. Mike, I don't know if you want to add any more of that, especially on the party, the Party Standing Committee. You found some research where we found that if there are disagreements, they go to the Party Standing Committee and it's voted on. And Mike, maybe if you want to add a little bit more onto that.
Well, they will first try to sort it out on a personal level, try to coordinate a little bit. And if that doesn't work, they will go for a vote. That will probably cause some trouble, cause some tension in the unit among the Party Standing Committee. Regarding, if you look at the political work regulations of the PLA, you see that during emergency situations, actually, the power of the military commander, in the case of PLA and the captain, right, the captain of the different vessels, their power actually grow. Because during these emergency situations, you really don't have enough time to have a meeting and let's discuss this and that. The captain will just make decisions on the spot. But after the event, he will have to report everything back to the Party Standing Committee, which is chaired by the political commissar. So I would say that, even with a expanded level of freedom when it comes to decision making, that captains probably still, sort of constrained in some ways, by this existing institutions.
I just want to add too, within that too, that question is, it's all about managing risk. Being a captain is about managing risk, and the political commissar is in that calculus of managing risk that they have to take on a daily basis.
I want to jump ahead a bit in the queue just because there's a question from my colleague Bonnie Glaser, which I think to stay in the realm of this, the so what for all of us looking at this. Jeff, this one's for you. I know initially this research or this interest had started because you'd been looking through your binoculars one day out in the Stetham and thought, who the heck is in the bridge on your counterpart over there at the PLAN? Bonnie's asking, now that you know this, or is this knowledge on the role of the political commissar continues to disseminate through the U.S. Navy and out to commanders in the Indo-Pacific aboard ships who are looking through binoculars, what impact does this knowledge now have for you? Let's say your next position as commanding officer. So what does this mean for a commanding officer as opposed to just helping our sort of IC and naval intelligence better understand the system? At the tip of the spear, why does this matter?
So thanks, Bonnie. Really, the so what is that as a military commander, you're looking and thinking that all the calculations and all the decisions that they're making is based on military expertise. Now there's a political function into that equation. And how does that influence the decision of how close they get, whether they protest FONOPs, whether we're sailing, wherever international law allows, and a Chinese vessel comes up, or, in our report, we talk mainly about Chinese vessels, submarines, and ships. But, this is also aircraft. We did find that political commissars are not in the aircraft per se, but having that political lens and understanding what the party is trying to achieve, not necessarily what the military is trying to achieve, I think is really important as we look at the future maritime encounters and hopefully not any maritime incidents.
I want to squeeze in a couple questions here in the next three to 4 minutes. Maybe Ziyang, this is a question for you. How does Xi Jinping interact with the commissar and the commanding officer? I think this question, does he show sort of a co-level of interest in these two, or does he prioritize one over the other based on what we know in terms of his public interactions with them?
Well, the commander and the commissar are supposed to be co-equals. So when Xi go and visit vessels, he meets both of them, and both of them will welcome him and take him and show him around. There's a ton of video evidence floating around, when he's going to the sub forces, both will be welcoming Xi and, giving him a tour. I would say that, but, in recent years, he really tried to emphasize on the party's control, the party's presence, the party's ideology. So overall, it definitely tipped the balance a little more to the side of the political commissars. If you look at least in surface units, before they refer to the captain solely as the mission commander. But since about 2 years ago, the political commissar is also referred to as the mission commander. And at least in the Southern Theater Command Navy, they are reserving a special spot just for the commissar, so he can command together next to the captain on the bridge.
You had mentioned this in one of the slides, but there's a question. I wonder if you can unpack this a little bit more. Are Chinese political officers trained with all of the military knowledge skills to effectively command forces in combat? One, and I think a sub question would be, under what circumstances would the political commissar be taking command of a ship?
Well, their job is actually, if you're talking about one of their specializations when it comes to political work, is the three warfares, and one of them is the psychological warfare. And besides stabilizing the unit, they also have to sort of conduct psychological operations on the enemy. And they do have to take examinations and pass these examinations to be promoted. But nowadays, like I said, they're also learning more about, say, their own unit. They have to take on for example, let's say in the naval aviation, they have to fly with certain type of units and sort of understand their psychology when they're during operations, so they can better conduct their work. And perhaps if the situation requires takeover, and that translates into the next question: when will they actually take over? I would say that if the captain is doing something totally out of his bounds, that threatens the national interest or the party's interest, you'll definitely see the political commissar getting involved. Or, this is a real example from the 1988 clashes near Johnson's South Reef with the Vietnamese Navy. The captain of one of the Chinese frigates, I believe it's Yingtan, he actually fell sick and had to recuperate on shore. And instead of letting the deputy commander, take power, the political commissar actually took over the frigate and took it all the way to the Spratlys and led the whole vessel during the entire skirmish. So that's a real example of when the commissar took over the situation.
Great, thanks, John. Jeff, any thoughts on that? We're up at the bottom of the hour here, so I wanted to wrap up, but I'll just give you and Ziyang a moment here if there's any final thoughts or comments you wanted to make.
Thanks, Joe. I think the biggest thing is, the system, there's three aspects to this. There's the political commissar, there's the dual command system, and then there's the party standing committee. And these are the mechanisms that are used on board ships to help develop and plan naval operations. The military commander still executes those plans that are developed, but this is different from the United States Navy. We operate on a leadership triad where the single person in command is the commanding officer. And that burden of command rests with that individual. And understanding that that's different going forward is important. And also, there are a lot of shortfalls from our research. We have a lot more questions now than we probably did before, it seems like, and hopefully there will be more research in this field. And we look forward to hearing those findings.
And Ziyang, any final thoughts from you before we wrap it up?
Sure. I would just say one point is that I believe in the future engagements with the PLAN, we should definitely include the political officers as one of the targets, of engagement, so we can better understand, what they do, how they operate, and perhaps get some answers about some of the questions that we still have. Interestingly, if you look into history, when it comes to engagement, the American side tend to ignore this class of officers, but I would say that it is time to understand them given their influence and power on these PLAN vessels.
Great, that's a really good point, Ziyang. Appreciate that. Thanks everyone for joining. We've got a lot of really good questions that have been put into the queue. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all these, but I'll make sure we get these comments and questions over to our two co-authors as there's some really valuable feedback here. Thanks again to Ziyang and Jeff for this really fantastic report, but also for joining us today. As you say, this is hopefully the beginning of a really productive stream of research that we see digging deeper into not only the granularity of how the party operates, but really those big so what questions of how does this affect China's futures evolutions? How does this affect China's political and military behavior? There's a lot of big question marks, not only for us, I think for the CCP as well. When and eventually it will, it starts putting this system to stress in real life situations. I think there's a lot of just known unknowns here about how it's going to perform. So this work is really crucial. But thanks to everyone. Report is available on CSIS. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Ziyang. Have a great day and have a great week.
Thank you.